As we mentioned before the break, former President Donald Trump appeared at the National Association of Black Journalists annual convention in Chicago earlier this week. Our own Yamiche Alcindor witnessed the event in person from the hotel conference room where it all unfolded. Yamiche, I must start with all the many falsehoods that Trump made during the 35-minute NABJ panel. There are so many of them, and unfortunately, we don't have that much time to dive into each one. So here is a list made up with the help of the Washington Post, and even we couldn't even fit all the lies in one graphic. Trump claimed nobody was charged for deaths in the Black Lives Matter protests. Not true. He said he saved historically black colleges and universities. Not true. He said he is the best president for black Americans since Abraham Lincoln. Really? That there is an invasion of 15, 16, 7 million people coming across the border. Absolutely not true. That Kamala Harris, was the border czar. She is not. Many migrants are coming from mental institutions, he says. They are not. The crime rate of other countries is going down. It is not. The U.S. is having its worst inflation in 100 years. Not true. Biden was ruled incompetent in his presidential records case. He was not. Democrats allowed the killing of babies after being born. Come on now, are you for real? And there's more. That everyone wanted Roe v. Wade overturned. It is, in fact, exactly the opposite. Drilling will reduce inflation. How so? Grocery bills are up 60%. Simply not true. The U.S. has more oil than any other country. Based on what data? And last but not least, falsely suggesting that maybe Kamala Harris had decided to turn black. My God, as a reporter, how do you even start with covering this man?
I think I start, as we all do, who are reporters and members of NABJ, this illustrious organization where people come to network and to mentor young Black reporters. We start by just really trying to take out the things that are most important. And you listed some of them, talking about January 6th, talking about the idea that Vice President Kamala Harris, who's likely going to be the Democratic nominee, the front runner, the person who has the most delegates to be the Democratic nominee, that she turned black. I think if I had to tell you that in the room, the sort of statements that got the most response were when he was questioning the race of the vice president and claiming that she was some chameleon of sort, because we know, as people who report on her, but also any American can go look at her background. She went to a historically Black college, Howard University. She also joined a historically Black sorority, the first in the nation to be founded, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And over again throughout her life, she's noted that she's both Black and Indian. So there were so many things going on, but I think the thing that really sort of resonated with people was that this was Trump sort of going after maybe birtherism 2.0 is the way that some of the sources I was talking to said it. And I do want to just point out that I was texting people that are close to Vice President Harris during the talk, and one of them was saying to me, he is completely unhinged. This is also Trump. He cannot help himself. The other person said, it is simply a lie and easily disproved. She went to Howard for Christ's sake. This is painful. Yeah. So that also was the reaction both outside of the room, too.
Now, just a quick follow-up. Trump having issues with race is one thing, but why do you think he goes after Kamala's gender, calling her crazy and defending J.D. Vance, who called her a childless cat lady? What is that all about?
Well, I think based on my reporting, and this is really what people close to the vice president, as well as Democrats, have told me, they believe that former President Trump is going after Vice President Harris's race and gender because he thinks there's a segment of the population that's going to be riled up by that, that's going to want to vote for him because that is what he's doing. And they secretly or overtly believe that that is something that should be criticized and that women should not be allowed to lead. Just the other day, Shaquille Brewster, one of our great NBC News correspondents, had a man who told him on the record, on camera, that he does not believe a woman should be president. And I heard that over and over again when I was reporting in 2016 and covering Bernie Sanders, that there were a segment of the Bernie supporters who said, well, I'm not voting for Hillary Clinton because I think she's a woman, and I just think that looks weak, and I think that our country's going to look weak on the world stage. So I think there is a population for that, and I think there is even a small sliver of an idea that maybe as he tries to appeal to black men, who by and large are Democrats, and by and large, based on my reporting, are excited about Vice President Harris.
Yeah.
He's thinking maybe there's a small sliver of the population of black men who are saying, oh yeah, well, I don't like her, and I don't think she's black, and by the way, I don't like the idea of the country being led by a woman.
Now, I think that Trump is running the same playbook he used against Obama in terms of questioning his real place of birth, and now questioning Harris chose to be black. Your thoughts on that? Is this just birtherism with point two?
Well, it's interesting to see him go to race, because I honestly, as someone who had been covering the campaign and have been covering the Harris campaign and was covering the Biden campaign, I thought he was going to be focusing on her issues and her tasks when it came to her dealing with the root causes of migration. I thought he was going to come and talk about her history as a prosecutor and maybe paint her as someone who's extreme, which is what his advertising has been doing. But to hear him talk about the fact that she, quote, turned black, and to sort of paint her as someone who was inauthentic when it comes to race was really surprising. And it wasn't surprising because we know that the former president has had issues with race. People, a number of voters, when I talk to black people, frankly, when I ask them, could you possibly support former President Trump, 99% of them say, well, he's racist, so I could never start and try to support President Trump. So, that's the reporting. But I think there is some feeling that works for him, because he did win in 2016 by doing some of that stuff, right? He did win and get a segment of the population. One other thing, though, Reverend Sharpton, there's the idea that he wanted to wrestle back the news cycle. For the last few weeks, even when he survived an assassination attempt, that was headline news for a few days. For the most part, he's having to deal with a news cycle where first we were talking about the uncertainty around President Biden's future, and then we have been talking about the pulsing energy that is going through the Democratic Party, this organic energy where you have thousands and thousands of people raising millions of dollars for Vice President Harris, feeling like there's an Obama 2.0 that's coming from her camp. Democrats, by and large, telling her that they feel like they really have the upper hand here. This is now Trump having to be back in the news, back in the A block. So I think there's also a media calculation there based on my reporting.
Now, finally, what do you make of all these new groups forming to support Vice President Harris? Just to mention a few: Win with Black Women, White Dudes for Harris, Disabled Voters for Harris, Dads for Harris. Wouldn't you call this a movement?
I think it is a movement based on my reporting. One person put it to me this way. They said, some people could say this is division because everyone's in their different camps. And this source said, no, this is more like the Democratic Party getting in formation. There's going to be a coalition formed, and everyone is sort of getting their segment of the coalition ready and waiting to make sure that they are all on board and that they are helping fund this campaign that's coming together in midair, right? This is the plane being built in midair. And you see all these millions and millions of dollars, the majority of them from people who are giving to campaigns for the first time. So it really is, I think, organic, and it is a movement. But the thing that I'm hearing from the Harris campaign is that now, as you see all of these new hires come in, a lot of the people from the Obama administration and other senior advisors are coming in. They want to make sure that this is a sustainable movement, that this isn't a honeymoon, that this isn't a sugar high. They want to make sure they have the infrastructure there so that they can harness this organic energy into a movement that actually gets people to the polls and gets the people voting.
Well, it's going to be an interesting race that you'll be covering. You have on one hand a proud Black Indian female prosecutor against a white felon, white orange candidate. NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, thank you for being with us.